Hello, 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 my beautiful blossoms, blooms, and buds. Took a second there. My brain was still loading. Welcome to my book garden. Actually, welcome to my basement, but we're here for a good time, so does it really matter? I don't think so. Anyway, welcome to the fourth live stream of Little Mushroom 2. Hi, Chi Chi Kiki. Your cosplay was super cute. I loved it, especially the potato. The potato is a very nice touch. Thank you so much for posting that. Thank you. Anyway, so we are on our fourth session of Little Mushroom 2 Revelation. Sorry, hang on, I gotta put this over there. It's cold in the basement, so I had a hot pack. Anyway, we are on our Little Mushroom fourth session, starting with chapter 42. And before that are legalities. I do not own anything connected with Little Mushroom. I own no rights. I'm not claiming anything. The only thing I claim is the physical copy that's in front of me that I'm reading from and my time. That's it. So please don't come at me about it. This is a 17 plus work. I have not really seen anything in it that would too much garner. I mean, maybe the arbiter aspects, but I'm sure we will get there one day. That may cause this to be a little iffy. But yes, just so you're aware if you weren't already by now. I think that's it. Oh, this is a very chill stream. I will be chatting with the audience and I will be commenting on the book I'm reading. If that's not really your thing, then I'm sorry. But that's kind of what's going to be happening. I hope you enjoy, because I know I will. Anyway, we can get into it unless anyone else has anything they want to add. Actually, first, tea sip. I have nice hot lemon honey tea tonight, so hopefully that will keep the voice nice and strong. A little too hot. Oh, hang on, I see my poster coming down already. 1 second. It just doesn't want to stay up. All right. Okay. So last time we arrived at a base. Let me see what it was called. Of basically like half human, half xenogenic people. The outcasts, basically a base of outcasts. And there was an instance where one of them kind of lost control. And we were all speculating that how very cultish it sounds, because they really are not, as one of you lovely commenters commented, beating the allegations. And so I have a feeling we may see a little bit more of that in this coming chapter. So with that, let's get into chapter 4. Oh, I just saw my shirt. I got another mushroom shirt. It's got all different kinds of fungus and fungi. It's so cute. Anyway, now that I am done being distracted, haha, that's a joke. Chapter 42. Then you disappoint me even more than Anji. I can't believe that the magnificent arbiter can only remain confined in my laboratory. Dr. G put the stack of materials in his arms on the table. Yes, sarcastically. Do you need me to bring you food? The one sitting on the armchair, originally belonging to Dr. G, was not the doctor himself, but the arbiter, clad in a black uniform. Whew. With a nonchalant bearing, his arms were folded and his long legs were crossed. A silver badge was missing from his chest, but the silver trimmings on the uniform itself filled in the blank space, rendering his attire and appearance as impeccable as always. Frosty eyes scanned the silvery white laboratory. Do you think I'm staying here willingly? I recommend that you be a little nicer to me. I'm not just asking for much, just that we recover 1% of the friendship we had when we were younger, the doctor said. You need to clearly recognize and understand the situation here. The trial court cannot even protect itself. If even I, your sole friend in this base, hadn't taken you in, you would have promptly been torn to shreds by the people outside. I heard that the United Front Center held 3 meetings in the row on the subject of whether the arbiter's qualification to surpass all other authority and kill people, as laid out in the arbiter's code, should be abolished or not. With these words, he winked slyly. You chose to come back from the wilderness. Do you regret it now? He had intended to stir up Lu Feng's emotions, but failed to do so. When compared to before Lu Feng heard those words, his expression had not changed in the least. Ever since contactless gene pollution and the composition exchange between inanimate matter were discovered, the base had fallen into an atmosphere of desperate unease. Perhaps the magnetic poles would be defeated by distortion in the very next moment, and they would become monsters, become objects, or become one with this base of iron and steel. These 8,000 people were the elites and the leaders of the military and the lighthouse, the most exceptional of the existing humans. Precisely because of their exceptional intelligence, they were better able to sense the horror of the inexorably approaching doomsday. The dying base maintained a tense peace that was like a lake surface covered with a thin layer of ice. It appeared solid, but in fact, a single tossed stone was all it would take for everything to come crumbling down. The cause was a shooting that had occurred 10 days earlier. If it had been anyone else, it would have blown over. The doctor looked at the arbiter, who was completely indifferent to anything he said, and gritted his teeth. The person killed was a respected scientist of the lighthouse. In the areas of trajectory calculation and ammunition improvement, he had made remarkable contributions, and thus was a luminary within the realm of military projects. Naturally, all the researchers within that realm supported his juniors, and the people of the military also revered him. 10 days ago, Lu Feng and Sarong ran into that scholar in a corridor of the United Front Center, and then they had even greeted each other by way of nodding. However, right as they passed each other, Lu Feng pulled out the gun clipped to Sarang's waist. His marksmanship was as precise as always, and his pull of the trigger was both swift and decisive. The bullet squarely struck the back of the ammunition expert's head, and blood sprayed like a firework as his corpse pitched forward and toppled to the ground. This incident alarmed almost the whole base. Students and friends of the deceased existed throughout the base, claiming that the deceased had a sharp mind, polite bearing, gentle disposition, and no sign of infection whatsoever. They demanded that the trial court give an explanation. But a living person had died, and because the wave of substance fusions 2 months ago had ruined the core components of the gene testing instruments, their operations were completely halted. So no proof to support the arbiter's judgment could be found. In this regard, the arbiter's only statement was that he acted in full accordance with the rules and regulations of the trials. Many old matters were dug up, and the calls demanding the trial court make its rules public reached their peak during this time. However, limit, limited to the power granted to the trial court by the arbiter's code, they had no way of sending Lu Feng to the military court. So the controversy over the code also reached its climax at that time as well. A young man named Colin, there he is, he's back, who claimed to be the prisoner of the original Outer Cities anti-trial movement, escaped the calamity that left only 8,000 people alive in the main city because he himself was a teacher working in the Garden of Eden. Now this hot-blooded young man was once again shouting the slogans that had once resounded throughout the outer city. At the same time, he attacked the merciless trampling of human nature by the military's other institutions with all his might, and he swiftly garnered a large number of faithful supporters. I knew he was going to pop back up. He just has that character description. In response, after a long silence, the United Front Center chose to do all in its power to suppress him. However, the humans at the base were mainly members of the lighthouse in the Garden of Eden. Their strength was limited, and they could not be merciless. Now, if a single person died, humankind would lose 1 out of 8,000. A riot occurring in a chaotic society of 8,000 people seemed to be an unsolvable quandary. In the midst of this tempest, a piece of little-known historical data was unearthed from the lighthouse and spread throughout the base like wildfire. It was a top-secret file belonging to the Fusion faction. That's their name. It was a top-secret file belonging to the Fusion faction from many years ago. People were very secretive about the faction's existence, but they truly did have undisputed scientific research capabilities. For 10 years of experiments and observation, they came up with an estimated probability of the living people who had been genetically infected. They had a 1 in 10,000 chance of retaining a certain degree of their human consciousness while obtaining monster characteristics, and a 1 in 6,500 may recover a certain degree of their human consciousness within 3 years of completely becoming a monster. To make matters worse, the data was accompanied by a dispassionate remark. 1 in 10,000 and 1 in 6,500 were only theoretical estimates. In reality, the true probabilities may be slightly higher. The day that data was leaked, the entire base went into a furor. In response, Colin wrote a lengthy essay, the topic of which was 100 years of the trial court, unverifiable sins. At the same time, a crazed soldier hid outside the trial court and fired at the arbiter, who said that his beloved commanding officer and comrades all died to the arbiter's gun. But unfortunately, in every aspect, the arbiter was an officer 100 times better than him, and the bullet failed to strike true. But this action inspired others. Instantly, the trial court became a target in various meanings of the term. Until Jibram submitted an application to the lighthouse, Dr. G brought up that the spore sample from the abyss showed an unprecedented inertia against infection, and being infected against distortion and being distorted. If they could understand the mechanism via research and apply it to the human body, humans may also be able to acquire this valuable characteristic. However, this strange and lively spore displayed an extraordinary closeness with the trial court's Colonel Liu. When it came into contact with the kernel, its growth speed and cell activity would both increase. Therefore, Colonel Liu had to cooperate with this research project. The base also had to guarantee the colonel's personal safety, for this may be where the last hope of humankind lay. 1 second. Sorry. Oh, goodness. Only then did a certain colonel named Lou appear in Dr. G's laboratory. The estimated 3 months are almost up. Although there's a lack of definite proof, the destiny of humankind is counting down. Dr. G sat next to Lu Fang. The main city never cared about the arbiter system before, but now, just like the former outer city, they are about to face trial. You must understand, once the magnetic poles are vanquished by distortion, everyone will be at risk of being infected, and everyone will be faced with a trial. All of them might die at the end of your gun. Although the trial court has done nothing yet, it has already become the enemy in their minds. Full-scale distortion will come eventually. They hope to achieve that 1 in 10,000 or 1 in 6,500, and taking you down will allow them to live a little longer. It has nothing to do with your own actions. Fear of death is a biological instinct. With those words, he frowned slightly and murmured, "For all these years, no matter how much the trial court has been pressured, not even a single word of the trial rules has been divulged. I believe that you people must have reasons that compelled you to be like this. But actually, I've always wanted to ask you a different question. Regarding the Fusion Faction's data, did you previously know about it or not?" Lu Feng looked past him and at the spore floating in the green culture solution. Because he was in the room, the spore's hypae were loosely unfurled. It had grown bigger, its core now the size of a person's palm. "Any results?" he asked flatly. "Unfortunately, no. It's a fraud, just like the wretched little Anji. Its only function now is to serve as your shield, and how long it can shield you for is a mystery." Dr. G looked into Lu Feng's eyes. Those green eyes. The northern base was a place where Asians dominated and other people lived mixed in. Black eyes were undoubtedly ordinary, but as for other colors, even blue and brown were not uncommon, but this frosty green really was too peculiar. Sometimes he would get the impression that this was some sort of emotionless inorganic matter, just like this man's usual gaze. It was as though no matter how many people he killed, no matter how others treated him, he would remain unmoved. There was no need to understand, much less forgive. All along, he had maintained this aloofness. Weak frustration suffused the doctor's mind. "I shouldn't be concerned about you, much less try to comfort you. You don't care at all." He took a deep breath and spread his hands in a shrug. "Every time I try to convince myself that you're a good person, you tell me with your actions that in terms of being emotionless, you really are a fucking prodigy." He examined Lu Feng's face. The man's facial features were so elegant and strong that it was like he was a sculpted mannequin. But unfortunately, the material was ice that would not melt for 10,000 years. The situation outside was so tense that the doctor feared someone would smash the laboratory door and hurl rocks at the arbiter the very next moment. But from the expression of the man himself, no signs of internal pain or torment could be seen. On the contrary, the man's slightly drooping eyelashes possessed a sedate calmness, like a ghostly black butterfly stopping to rest on the dignified window lattice of a temple. The abolition of the arbiter's code had not yet been decided, so in the electronic system, the limit of Lu Feng's authority was as lofty as before. Currently, the computer screen next to him was still playing the real-time surveillance footage of the base's crowded areas, confirming that no one was infected. In resignation, the doctor did not hold back with his sardonic words. "I'm really curious as to what expression you will have on the day you get sent to the gallows by everyone at the base." With that, he stared straight into Lu Feng's eyes, trying to catch the shift in his mood. But unfortunately, Lu Feng's attention was not drawn to the fierce gaze at all. What he'd been looking at the entire time was the spore, or the entire culturing instrument, or perhaps something in the empty space within it. Thank you, that cold voice said. I deserve it. The doctor relaxed and then said once again, once again clenched the fist he was resting on the table. At last, he dejectedly leaned against the back of the chair and said, I should just push you out there. You've gone mad ages ago. I'm very lucid. Lu Feng finally turned his gaze back to him. Does the laboratory have anything I can help with? Watch over your little fungus and make it grow faster, the doctor said. If you can, keep an eye on the Research Institute's communication channel for me. The Arbiter was confined in the lighthouse, but this fervent riot did not conclude with compromise between both parties. Instead, it worsened. People stopped working to hold demonstrations against the base. The site for their collective demonstration was at the entrance to the artificial magnetic pole apparatus. According to deceptive rumors, the base's policymakers were incandescent with rage. But during this time, when everything was in chaos, they no longer had absolute control. In the end, they made a great concession. The trial court's right to kill was temporarily removed. Although the members of the trial court still conducted inspections, the suspected infected individual discovered during their inspections were not immediately killed, but taken to a military training camp at the other end of the base and imprisoned apart from each other for observation. Secondly, denied possession of firearms, the Arbiter himself remained in the lighthouse's laboratory to cooperate with their research, unable to go out. It's difficult to say whether this was the base's protection for the Arbiter or perhaps a precaution against him. The atmosphere in the base finally relaxed. After all, their primary target was Lu Feng himself. As this generation's Arbiter, Colonel Lu's arbitrariness and bloodthirstiness astounded everyone. Arbitrariness, sorry, not arbitrariness. He was very arbiter. Supposing the trial court executed 5,000 people in a year, 4,500 of those people would have fallen to his gun. The remaining 500 executions at the hands of the other judges were because the Arbiter was not present at the trial court due to forces beyond human control. After a brief calm, people began berating the lighthouse for not producing any notable progress for many days, and Gibran, who was in charge of this project, was Lu Feng's old friend. The last hope of humankind was clearly a misleading lie, a one-sided shield. They demanded that the lighthouse either produce sufficient results to convince the public or hand over Lu Feng. By relying on how the human population cannot lose even one more life, they can do anything. The doctor poured himself a glass of water. Their words are deeply flawed, but this is the only way for them to give vent to their terror now. As he spoke, he put the cup up to his lips, but his hand was trembling. Water splashed out from the cup and landed on the table. The doctor forced down a mouthful, but then his face promptly showed a pained expression, and he bent double and retched continuously. I also live in great terror. I want to vomit, he said in a trembling voice. A cold wave has already invaded. Winter is coming. The time when monsters are the most frenzied and most in need of nutrition has arrived. We all know that in the eyes of monsters, humans are but a piece of meat dripping with fat. Even when the base was at its zenith, monsters continually tried to attack. The doctor murmured with a smile. Can you guess when they'll discover that the human base has weakened to our current state? When will they assemble and storm the human base? Just like how they grouped up and stormed the underground city base. Lu Feng said, Calm down first. Do you think everyone is motionless like you? The essence of humans lie in their capacity for empathy. Panic spreads exponentially in a crowd like a virus. At this sort of time, the fact that you are able to keep calm instead proves the fearsome extent of your inhumanity. The doctor took a few deep breaths. Sometimes harsh language could allow people to relax. That's true. He looked like he had finally recovered a little. Please pass on this quality of yours to me through infection. When you can no longer continue working, what are you thinking? Wu Feng nonchalantly looked at him. Humanity's interests take precedence over all else. Precedence, not presidents. Sorry. The doctor let out a resigned laugh. After he finished laughing, he took a deep breath. Seeming to have finally calmed down, he came over to the large petri dish that held the spore. They actually think that a little white fungus can save all humankind. This is the funniest thing I've ever heard. In fact, the composition of that fungus is no different from what we use to make mushroom soup. With clear articulation, the doctor repeated the word of the outsiders. He resembled a strict teacher who was scolding students with failing grades. Do you hear me? If things continue like this, they will cook you into a bowl of mushroom soup sooner or later. You must take the initiative to show how you are different from the rest. The snow-white hype trembled in the nutrient solution. The spore slowly drifted in Lu Feng's direction, pressed right up against the inner wall of the glass, as if by doing so it could get closer to Lu Feng. He's bullying the spore! That's not cool! He's just a baby! Lu Feng said in a low voice, Don't scare it. It understands. I bet it understands. Over the past several days, we've fed it countless monster extracts. It ate them all. Anji is a little monster with a polymorphic class mutation, so it must be the same for his spore as well, the doctor said. If it didn't have its own consciousness and intellect, it definitely wouldn't escape its imprisonment, sleep with you every night. Ah! It escapes every night so it can cuddle? That's really cute. Oh my goodness. So what about your progress? Lu Feng frowned slightly. It ain't so many monster genes, but it's still the same spore. It's absolutely stable. Those gene extracts definitely didn't disappear. I surmise that it can subjectively control the transformation of its own shape, like how Anji could change into a human, the doctor said. If humans can also have this kind of quality, we wouldn't be afraid of the distortions. You people wish to use it to infect humans, Lu Feng said. Are you not afraid of all the infected individuals being taken over by the mushroom's consciousness? We haven't yet reached the point of thinking about this problem yet. The doctor rested his forehead on the glass. The key point is this damned little thing won't infect others at all. Anji and it disappoint me equally. While he was talking, the spore once again floated to the surface of the nutrient solution of its own volition and climbed up slowly, then flowed out from the crevice between the lid and main part of the petri dish. It fell down and was caught in Lu Feng's hand, where it lazily lay just like a carefree little fellow. Its various actions showed that to a certain degree it was indeed a creature with subjective awareness. It is capable of movement and can think, but it doesn't even have a nervous system, the doctor said. Do you know what this means? I'm a biologist. The phenomenon of distortion made the physicist's body of knowledge collapse, and the existence of this spore destroyed my body of knowledge. The arbiter had no interest or need to pay attention to how a biologist's knowledge was destroyed. As he held the soft mass of hype in his hand, Lu Feng asked, How did Anji disappoint you? He didn't have any infectivity to speak of either. The doctor pulled himself together and sighed. The bed-sharing relationship between you two, you're still a human without any indication whatsoever of being infected. Your will also hasn't been influenced by him to become kinder, not even an iota. Just like his spore, he can't infect people. Lu Feng gave him a flat look, seeming to be contemplating something. Just as Dr. G assumed he was about to say something of value, the colonel said, "I haven't vetted him." The doctor stared straight at him. "Then you disappoint me even more than Anji." "There it is. There's our title." Anji woke up from a comfortable dream. In the dream, he didn't have eyes, a nose, or any of the other organs that all humans sensed with. He seemed to have gone back to a very, very far-off past, time when he was deeply buried in soft, damp soil. But it was by no means soil. He seemed to be somewhere not far from Lu Feng. His proximity to the colonel's breasts was even closer than his proximity to death. Oh, he's sensing his baby! After opening his eyes, he dazedly looked at the gray ceiling. This entire time he had been trying hard to avoid thinking about the people and things in the northern base. He could feel the fading of his memories, having almost forgotten the appearances and mannerisms of Poet, the doctor, and Colin. Everything that had happened in the city was gradually disappearing, but Lu Feng appeared with increasing frequency in his dreams. Sometimes, when he opened his eyes in his disoriented state, he would feel that the man was right at his side. The deep green vine leaves hanging next to the window had not yet withered when they were covered by a layer of white frost, turning them a crystalline color. It was like Lu Feng's eyes were looking at him. By the way, today is apparently the first day of spring. Happy spring. I know for a lot of us, especially Northern Coast, we got snow. So, happy spring. But the icy chill of the outer world swiftly enveloped him again. Outside the window, laden clouds hung low over the mountaintop. The hard ground at the summit bloomed with frost. Winter had arrived. The people of Highland Research Institute took extra care of him as always. 10 days ago, he received a knitted woolen scarf and a pair of rabbit fur gloves. Every day, he left the main building while bundled up in these warm things and went to stay in Polly's laboratory in the White Building. The Simpson cage consumed vast amounts of electricity, while the capacity of the wind turbines was limited. Every day, it could only be turned on for 2 hours. The rest of the time, Polly did other things. Sometimes he taught Anji some physics or biology concepts, such as how everything was made up of molecules and atoms could be split into electrons, protons, and neutrons. However, that was far from the end. As for what exactly made up the basis of the world's matter, nobody could see it. If a blind man wants to perceive the world, he can only reach out and touch things. But what he feels is obviously not the thing's entirety. Our understanding of the world is as shallow as the blind man's, doomed as we are to only see the facades. We have a lot of assumptions, but we are unable to verify whether they are correct or not, Polly said. As he spoke, the howling north wind on the mountaintop pushed open the laboratory window. The brown-skinned Indian man got up to close the window, and Polly Jones gave Anji's scarf an upward tug. The scarf wrapped around Anji's entire neck. Buried in the soft and warm fabric, he asked Polly, "Are you not cold?" "At my age, many parts have become dull." Polly Jones looked at him with those warm, gray-blue eyes, and Anji could see his own reflection within them, all wrapped up in white. But he didn't look for too long before he bowed his head and started coughing. Although it was so cold outside, it was like a fire was burning painfully in his lungs. Polly stroked his back and then held out the warm water that was on the table to him. "Do we have any antibiotics left?" he asked the Indian man, whose name was Rum. "We still have some." After Anji finished coughing, he took the medicine while trembling. A charcoal brazier had been lit in the room, but he still felt very cold. I can't find the cause of your illness. Polly wiped away the fine layer of cold sweat from the side of Anji's forehead with his finger. With pain evident in his gray-blue eyes, he murmured, "There aren't any advanced instruments here. I apologize." Anji shook his head. "It's all right." Polly had said that humankind's understanding of the world would always be shallow, and sometimes Anji also thought that his own understanding of humans was only a facade. When he had returned to the abyss, he never expected to receive such hospitality from humans. For example, Polly was no medical expert, but because of Anji's body that was weakening day by day, he began to read the medical literature contained in the database. Rum helped with the search as well. Sometimes Anji felt guilty because of their sincerity, since he was not human. It was like he stole these acts of kindness while draped in a human skin. He began fearing the exposure of his original form on the day of his death. He once told Polly that there was no need to take such troubles. At the time, Polly felt the temperature of Anji's forehead with the back of his hand and murmured, "You're like my own child." When Polly wasn't around, he asked Rum in a roundabout way why Polly would be so kind to him. Rum's reply was that Mr. Polly loved everyone here. Is Polly the leader? I can't remember. If he is, that's a very culty line. He loves all of his good children. Oh my gosh, this chair. Before I came to the research institute, half of my body was broken and mildewed, and I was not lucid. Rum rolled up his pants leg and revealed sturdy lower legs that were covered with hideous scars and earthworm-like protrusions. They usually... I think he said there was no leader. Okay. Polly seems kind of to have kind of a leaderish role, even if there is no leader. At least in taking care of Anji. I don't know. I hope he's just a good dude. Let's just put it that way. I hope he's just a good dude. Maybe he had a kid, lost his kid, which is sad, but like, it's less suspicious. Pardon me. Okay. Before I came to the research institute, half of my body was broken and mildewed, and I was not lucid. Rum rolled up his pants legs, and revealing sturdy lower legs that were covered with hideous scars and earthworm-like protrusions. The usually taciturn man spoke a lot. Regardless of day or night, Mr. Polly treated me for half a year. In the past, I did not believe that there could be such a person in this world either. That's pretty awesome. So I'm hoping he's a good dude. Then he said, "I used to not be a good person. When I was a mercenary, I hurt my teammates. Now I've saved 3 compatriots from the outside, which counts as my atonement. It's not bad to be a good person, and it's better to be a person than a monster. Many people in the research institute are like me. No one disrespects Mr. Polly." Kind of like you don't fuck with the bartender. Anji clearly remembered that at the time that he had suddenly thought of Lu Feng for no reason, an inexplicable association. He was thinking about how Lu Feng was doing now. Then he shook his head, driving the shadow of that guy who was Polly's polar opposite out of his mind. Rum was an amateur music lover. When he had nothing else to do, he would practice playing the harmonica while looking at an old music score. Sometimes he taught Anji as well, and the sound was pleasing to the ear. But Rum said that humans used to have instruments that were thousands of times more wonderful than the harmonica, and together they could perform symphonies of unparalleled grandiosity. When he said that, Polly came over to them and said jokingly, "If Rum had been born 100 years earlier, he would have definitely been an outstanding musician. The always reticent Rum smiled. Then he would take out a shabby old radio, turn the tape over, and press the play button, and intense or gentle rhythms would come out from the rusty machine. It was the sound of countless types of instruments being played together, each with their own timbres and melodies that combined together to form another magnificent sound. The music flowed and reverberated in the laboratory with the burning charcoal. At the bottom of the white building, a man whose left arm had transformed into a beast's paw waved in their direction, and Rum hung the radio on the handrail outside and turned up the volume. Airy and flowy music traveled through the window that was covered with blossoms of frost. On the tape, there was an announcement before the music played. This was Beethoven's Spring Sonata. With cheek resting in hand, Anji listened. Springtime in the abyss was also very beautiful, but he probably could not see it anymore. It was at this time that he received a short message from the northern base. The communication channel, which had long been silent, flashed with red light. In the address list, there was only one anonymous party. Anji pulled up the communication interface. The short message sent by the anonymous party contained only 2 lines made up of 10 or so words. Winter has come. The monster's behaviors are different. Stay safe. Anji enlarged the words and turned back to look at Polly. Sir? A message from the northern base, Dr. G. Polly said. Over the past several years, only as he has been constantly communicating with me in secret. The words Dr. G sent Anji into a daze. He asked, Do you want to reply? Yes, Polly said warmly. Please reply for me. The northern base. The communication channel lit up. It was a short reply from the Highland Research Institute. Message received. Thank you for the reminder. Please be sure to stay safe as well. The doctor walked past the communication screen. Colonel Lou Tisk. The tone of his voice lifted up. It's hard to imagine that the Arbiter would do such a thing. You're unexpectedly still a good person. Lu Feng's gaze was flat as he looked at the words on the screen. Who is the other party? He asked. Someone you definitely couldn't have thought of, Dr. G said. Polly Jones. All right, that's the end of chapter 42. Kind of interesting how they pop back and forth between them. I'm kind of enjoying it right now. I hope you all are too. Okay. Just gotta make sure that doesn't fall. Chapter 43. That's because you are of noble character and honest. The early warning from the northern base was succinct. Polly said, They've discovered it too. Aw, thank you, Chichikiki. Glad you're always enjoying it. They've discovered it too. Anji looked outside. The Highland Research Institute lay on the top of the highest mountain. Looking down, all of the abyss was visible. The fault zone was like a hideous wound on the Earth's pale gray skin, and the dense forest and bogs were the wound's blood, plasma, and pus. In the distance, the faraway east bank was the sea or a huge lake. All in all, the end of it couldn't be seen, spread far beyond the horizon. During times of utter silence, whispers were mixed in with the sound of the wind, and the vast roar of the surf was faintly audible in the fog. In short, it was like a monster silently entrenched on the ground. This was not the abyss that Anji was familiar with. He had realized this earlier as well. In the past, the abyss was a place full of blood and pillaging. There had never been such a calm moment in it before. The shadow appeared in the distant sky, and it became bigger and came closer before finally stopping in the sky above the white building. With a whoosh, Tang Lan folded his wings and landed directly on the corridor outside. Then he pushed open the laboratory door. "I have returned, sir." Then he turned to Rum. "Have there been any attacks recently?" Rum said, "No." Polly Jones lifted his head and examined him from head to toe, seemingly confirming whether his condition was normal or not. If the person performing this action was Lu Fang, Anji would have thought that he was judging the person and deciding whether to shoot or spare them. But as Polly's warm, gray-blue eyes looked at Tang Lan, Anji was sure that this was only a case of a kindly elder showing concern over whether or not Tang Lan had gotten hurt outside. As expected, Polly asked, "Did you run into danger outside?" "Yes, but I didn't get hurt," Tang Lan said. "I'm quite experienced when it comes to that place." Polly said, "You have always allowed me to rest assured." Tang Lan smiled. His eyes were sharp and beautiful, with a faint, biting chill to them. Anji remembered that Hubbard was the most exceptional military team commander, so his lieutenant was most certainly not an ordinary person either. That's right. It's his lieutenant / secret boo. I know it said beau, but it's more fun to call him a boo. Polly Jones asked, "How was it outside?" "About the same as what you'd expect," Tan Long replied. "They've reached equilibrium." As he spoke, he pulled out a data cable from a drawer and connected the miniature camera that was in his hand to the computer. Up to 100 photos were uploaded and tossed onto the big screen nearby. At first glance, there was nothing in those pictures save for the indescribably strange scenes unique to the abyss. It was like they were just landscape photos taken by novelty-seeking tourists. But upon closer look, they made people involuntarily hold their breaths. The most eye-catching one was a photo of a massive lake that was taken from above. It had frozen over, the white ice having frozen the brown algae, floating remnants of limbs and fallen leaves on the surface of the lake. However, beneath the vacant span of ice, a huge, irregularly shaped shadow was visible. It was an aquatic organism's back, and it was quietly staying in the water, its shadow like an abstract painting. Dude, that is some abyss-level shit. Like, I have great respect and fear for the ocean, and it's because of shit like that. Like, the dark shadow underneath the water is terrifying to me. Oh. Okay. Right on the shore of this lake, the jungle's withered branches were enveloped in giant clumps of dull red vines. The next photo was a close-up of a vine. Its exterior was smooth like an earthworm, and underneath its skin were star-shaped radical patterns. Crowded black blood vessels seemed to be pulsing, and Anji immediately realized that this was no ordinary plant. All the vines in the entire jungle belonged to the same tentacle monster. "I only took one photo here. It noticed me," Tang Lan said. Polly took the remote control and went through the photos one at a time. After 3 months of slaughter, the ones alive now are all large monsters, and the few remaining small creatures are nowhere to be seen, Tang Lan said. "I had a few fights with them. Sir, I'm certain that right now, out of everyone in the entire research institute, Only my strength is enough to escape from them. But I'm completely unable to fight them head-on. Furthermore, the vast majority of the monsters in the abyss are polymorphic class. I'm not sure exactly how terrifying they are right now. I understand. Polly nodded slowly, a solemn expression in his gray-blue eyes. I don't know if you heard that, but that's my lovely dog. Please ignore him. I understand. Polly nodded slowly, a solemn expression in his gray-blue eyes. Supposing genes are a type of resource, they've already finished consolidating what's in the abyss. Now the monsters have reached an equilibrium of strength between themselves. Their intelligence has also greatly increased during the consolidation process. They understand that fighting may result in damage to both sides, threatening the whole. If this conjuncture isn't wrong, there must be some monsters that have already started leaving the abyss to hunt outside of it. Humans are certainly one of the targets of their hunt as well, but it's just that they haven't noticed for the time being. We must defend against the monsters' combined attacks at any given moment. It is indeed the case, Tonglan said. But there's one thing that differs from your conjecture. Polly asked, did you discover something? Controlling the computer, Tonglan pulled up an image. It was difficult to imagine exactly how ugly this image was. By no means did Anji have a frame of reference for aesthetics, but he was certain this image could be described as ugly because it assaulted people's senses to the greatest possible extent. On the crowded surface of two mollusks grew all the organs that the human language could describe, the ones that couldn't be described. They had reached out with mucus-covered tentacles to interact with the other. In the next photo, their tentacles had separated. In the photo after that, one of the two had gone off in another direction. Why does that sound like these two abyss creatures just mated? Oh good, they're going to make another abomination. I've observed 6 cases of similar situations. Unlike your initial prediction, the monsters have not been each occupying their own territories and refusing to budge. They've been moving around in the abyss, feeling each other out, and then separating. Tonglan's tone became solemn and grim. I suspect that the worst has happened, sir. They seem to be communicating, but I don't know what the content of those messages are. Whenever contact occurs between them, I can feel that the waves on their bodies become stronger. Okay, good. Like, I'm down with a lot of things, but like, I don't want to think about that one. He continued, I suspect that they are feeling each other out and probing to see whether or not the other party has the genes they need. It's very possible, Polly said. As for the wave, you're one of the ones with the most acute sense of it within this research institute. Lately, I've been more and more sensitive to it. Tonglan's face was slightly pale. It's everywhere in the air, and every monster's body has it as well. Sometimes I feel like even the rocks on the ground are vibrating. It's getting harder and harder for me to keep thinking. I wasn't supposed to come back so soon, but I felt the waves of my own body being integrated into them. Sir, my consciousness is a bit abnormal. Polly held his hand and said calmly, Don't be afraid. 100 years ago, in the age when biological gene sequences were the most stable, there were already some species that were particularly sensitive to changes in the magnetic field. You just happened to fuse with such a creature, he said. But it's not the magnetic field. I can feel it. The magnetic field is a different kind of wave. Tonglan closed his eyes. Getting down on one knee, he rested his forehead against the back of Polly's hand. His voice was hoarse as he asked, "Sir, have you already realized something? When I was talking, you weren't surprised at all." He continued, "But you won't tell us, because the truth is something we're unable to handle," he said. "But I truly..." His voice became more broken and hoarse the more he spoke, and in the end he could not continue. "Do not be afraid, child," Polly said in a voice that was gentle and vast ocean as he slowly clasped Tong Lan's shoulder with his right hand. "I will protect all of you up until my final moment." Tong Lan lifted his head and looked straight at Polly Jones. As though he were making a solemn oath, he said, "We will also protect you and the Research Institute until the final moment. I've never made demands of any of you, but supposing the day comes when the Research Institute no longer exists," Polly said slowly, "I beg you all to not join the torrent of xenogenics and monsters, but rather go north and protect the human base." Tong Lan said, "But the Arbiter will shoot all xenogenics. The base won't even accept us. Won't ever accept us." Polly looked at the boundless twilight outside. Sorry, my back. "But even during our final moments, I'm still willing to believe to the greatest possible extent in humankind's kindness and leniency," he said. The corners of Tong Lan's mouth twitched, and he looked up at Polly Jones. "That's because you are of noble character and honest." Polly shook his head with a fond smile. Alright, I can hear myself getting nasally. That's kind of a page break part. After Tong Lan left, the Simpson cage's power reserves also reached a critical value. The wide platform at the bottom of the white building shone with a harsh scarlet light and radiated waves of heat. If it was not clear that this was a high-energy field produced by machines and used to capture the vibration frequencies, interaction trajectories of elementary particles, Anji would have thought it was the raging sea of fire downstairs. The large screen in the laboratory was the Simpson cage's terminal and console, but due to defects in its design, sometimes it was necessary to go downstairs and manually adjust the levers of certain precision instruments in order to adjust its parameters. On the big screen, the lines were still a confusing mess, but they were by no means unchanging. Every time Polly adjusted the parameters, the tangled lines would change from one kind of mess to another kind of mess. But in the end, it was still all a mess. Just as before, Polly repeatedly analyzed the lines, calculated the functions, adjusted the parameters, and changed the receiving frequency. Just like that, the shifting lines danced on the screen. Music interrupted Anji's thoughts. In the corridor, the old-fashioned tape recorder was playing the tempestuous Symphony No. 5. Rum stood by the window, a book of sheet music propped up in front of him. He played the harmonica while facing the score, imitating the symphony's melody. After some time he stopped. "Do you understand music?" he asked. Anji shook his head. Rum pointed to the tape recorder. "After listening to one piece, are you able to know how to play it?" Anji shook his head a little more quickly. For such a complex symphony, it was all he could do to appreciate one 10,000th of its rises and falls, much less reproduce it. You have to have a score, Rum murmured as he turned over a page of the sheet music. But at the word score, his gaze was directed at the screen in the middle of the laboratory. As though a formless string had been gently plucked, his chaotic and complex thoughts instantly became clear. All of a sudden, Anji's eyes widened slightly. The wave is a symphony, he said. Mr. Polly wants to work out its score. Then it will be possible to do many things. Rum looked at him with his deep, dark gaze. You're smarter than me. G looked at the screen as well. Was it possible to obtain the secrets of the distortion calamity by analyzing these lines? His eyes had a perplexed look to them. Or perhaps this endless chaos was the truth in another sense of the word. A heavy silence enveloped the laboratory. Anji bowed his head. The fate of humankind was as vague as that wad of lines. Perhaps all of this had nothing to do with mushrooms, but sometimes he would also feel that breathing was difficult. It was difficult to explain the reason, but as he faced the communication channel linked to the northern base, he placed his fingers on the keyboard. The movements of his fingers were no longer dexterous, just like how his hype could no longer extend. When he tapped the keys, his fingertips trembled uncontrollably. Without fiber optics or base stations, the cost of communicating was very high. As though he were using humankind's undersea telegraph communications from centuries ago, he had to be sparing with his words. He sent it. How's the situation at the base? Like an absurd coincidence, the communication channel lit up at almost the same time. A similar message had come from the northern base. What's the status of the research institute? The northern base could sacrifice everything for the purity of human genes. They despised monsters, and the trial court showed it absolutely did not tolerate xenogenics. It seemed that only the kind scientist Dr. G tolerated the fusion faction's existence and cared about the status of things at the research institute. Anji replied, Everything is fine. Pretending that all was well seemed to be a skill unique to humankind, and he had learned it. A few seconds later, the other party replied, likewise with the base. Facing the communication interface, Anji was deep in thought for a long second before he slowly typed, Is the Arbiter doing well? After some contemplation, he pressed the backspace key, made a few revisions. Right as he was revising his message, one came in from the northern base. Has the Research Institute discovered any new types of xenogenics recently? Anji thought for a moment, then replied, Not yet. After replying, he sent the revised sentence. Is the trial court doing well? The other party replied, The trial court is operating as normal. Anji relaxed. Wishing you all the best, he politely sent a closing remark. Good night. The other party's reply was also only one word. Good night. While looking at that word, Anji lifted his finger from the keyboard and took out the silver badge. His body's decline was speeding up, and had already reached its final moments. With stiff finger joints, he tried hard to hold the badge in his hand. The sound of movement came from the stairs, for Polly had come up. Rather than returning to the room, though, he silently stood by the corridor railing, his back towards Anji. Anji got up and walked over to Polly. The music stopped. Downstairs, the Simpson cage was burning fiercely, and the night washed over them. From the dark, remote skies came a long howl. Polly asked, You aren't going to stay inside? Anji shook his head, thinking of Tonglan's earlier words. Sir, he asked, have you already realized something? Polly looked at him. Sometimes I feel like your capacity for acceptance is higher than that of all other people, Polly said. You're very special. You seem to be more fragile than anyone else, yet you also seem to be afraid of nothing. Anji slowly lowered his gaze. He said. But I haven't gotten the final answer yet. Polly reached out and buttoned the first line of buttons on Anji's coat. Would you like to hear me tell you a very simple story? Anji said, I would. It was very long time ago, a scientist's imaginings. In the cold wind, Polly's voice was warm. Supposing that you traveled through time today and arrived at a year from now. There, you traveled through time again and returned to 1 year ago, arriving here. Then right in front of me would be two identical versions of you. Anji thought for a while, then said, You know that matter consists of units known as atoms, and inside atoms are electrons. In this world, no two leaves are alike, but all atoms are identical. In that case, how could you tell that two electrons are two different ones? After thinking some more, Anji said, they're in two different spots. But space is not necessarily a metric of location, nor is time. These two things hold meaning only for four-dimensional humans. In higher dimensions, time and space are likewise just the horizontal and vertical axes on a sheet of white paper, just like this. Polly took out a piece of chalk from his pocket and drew a line on the railing in front of them. An electron moves freely through time and space. The left side is backward, the right side is forward. Now it passes through time, traveling forward by 1 second. As he spoke, he used the chalk to draw a line on the right that slanted downward and added another dot. After passing through time, it is here. Then it passes through time again, going 1 second backward and stops here. The chalk drew a line to the left and downward, then added another dot. Now there were 3 dots and 2 lines on the railing. They formed an acute angle that opened leftward, and the 2 dots on the left lay on a vertical line. Polly drew the vertical line. Our time is right here at the second. At this time, what do we observe? Anji thought for a very long time. In the end, he said, 2 electrons. Yes, we observe 2 identical electrons, but in essence, they are actually one, and they are just appearing in 2 places at the same time. Polly added more electrons next to those 2, making them resemble countless stars. Roughly estimating, our world has 10 to the power of 51 identical electrons, forming the matter that we can observe. How can you prove that this is not the result of the same electron repeatedly oscillating and traveling back and forth millions of times on the axis of time? Similarly, how can you prove that the existence of the entire observable universe is not the result of one or a few basic particles dancing through time and space? Anji frowned. He had no way of proving it, of course. With his limited knowledge, he strenuously digested this sentence. So, are you and I both the same electron? Polly smiled warmly and wrapped an arm around Anji's narrow shoulders, like an elder wrapping an arm around an innocent young child. This is but one of humankind's countless conjectures about the true nature of the world. It is not necessarily the truth, or perhaps it is absolutely nothing in common with the truth. It's just that it's difficult for us to verify it. I gave this example only to explain that within a greater metric, the brief existence of our bodies, minds, and wills, as well as the existence of the entire world, are even more insignificant than a single electron. Anji looked into the distance. He was just a mushroom with a simple composition. He didn't have a scientist's mind, nor did he have such a rich knowledge and insightful dimension transcending nor did he have such rich knowledge and insightful dimension transcending thoughts. Unable to understand such a system, he only knew that this world was authentically displayed before his eyes. He murmured, but we're all real. After he finished speaking, the expression on his face went blank for a second. His brow furrowed as pain lanced through his lungs. He clutched the railing, body trembling violently, and coughed up a mouthful of blood before falling forward. With trembling arms, Polly caught Anji's limp body and held him in his embrace. "Rum!" he shouted in the direction of the laboratory, anxiety in his voice. Anji knew that Polly wanted to treat him again, or search for the cause of his illness by using warmth, antibiotics, defibrillators, that sort of thing. He coughed up another mouthful of blood, and Polly wiped it away with his sleeve. Blood dyed the edge of the snow-white shirt sleeve red. Anji looked at Polly and forced a smile. "There's no need." He slowly grabbed Polly's arm, panted a few times, and said softly, "There's really no need." Polly held him in an iron grip. "Hang in there a little longer." As Anji looked into his eyes, he seemed to catch sight of the boundless sea and sky. He was actually fine, for he had not yet reached his weakest moments. At least he could still move, and his thoughts were clear. But he was going to die. If not today, then tomorrow. He could die just like this. Polly was the best elder in the world. He regarded Anji as a beloved child, treating him so well. At the end of his life, he could die with such a gentle love, something that the other people of this age dared not even dream of. But if he died like this, Polly would accept his arbitrary death. Unable to find the cause of illness, he could do nothing to help. Anji knew that for humankind scientists, such unsolvable problems and inexplicable truths were the most profound frustrations. He could also die as a monster. He wasn't afraid that Polly would abhor him. What Polly had given him was already enough, more than enough. "I'm sorry. I'm sorry." He looked at Polly. After making that decision, he relaxed a lot. The pain in his body was nothing. He said again, "I'm sorry, Polly." Polly gazed at him. Anji smiled. He coughed a few times and tears slid down, the exact same temperature as blood. Strenuously gasping for breath, he said to Polly, "I lied to you. I'm not a human infected by a monster. I was originally a monster. I'm not human. I just ate a human's genes. I just look like a human." Polly seemed stunned for a second. Then a more gentle sorrow showed in his gray-blue eyes. "No matter what you are, hang in there a little longer, okay?" Anji shook his head. "I'm not sick," he said. "My lifespan is just this long. It can't be changed. You don't need to help me anymore." After he had finished speaking, Polly held him tight. As they looked at each other, they fell into a sorrowful silence. Compared to illnesses or injuries, the fixed lifespan of a creature was something even more inexorable. There we go. The end was determined from the moment of birth. Nobody could step over the threshold set by God, if God truly existed. In the oppressive silence, the chilly wind howled, and Anji heard Polly say something amidst the sound. The moment the words reached his ears, his heart abruptly quivered. What he said was so familiar to the point where it was like he had returned to that night 3 months ago when he was facing Lu Feng. The wind was strong that day as well. Polly Jones asked, "What's that in your hand?" Facing him, Anji had nothing else to hide. He slowly uncurled his fingers. A silver badge lay quietly in his hand. This was the token that proved the Arbiter's identity. Polly's eyes landed on the badge, and Anji swore that he saw in those gray-blue eyes a distant grief. Then Polly Jones retrieved something from his own jacket's inner pocket and held it in the palm of his hand. Anji's eyes widened slightly. It was also a silver badge. It was a nearly identical badge. "You," Anji was stunned. "You're an arbiter." "Once upon a time," Polly murmured. "I'm a defector." That's a plot twist I did not see coming. And that's also the end of that chapter. So we have 2 more. But, like always, it's time for a tea break. Oh my gosh, this chair is driving me crazy this time. Oh, it's stuck on my carpet. I'm just gonna scooch the carpet. Go away. Okay. Sorry. Okay. All right. Chapter 44. The aurora lit up the abyss. I am willing to take up arms for the safety of humankind. I will grant a fair judgment to every compatriot. Although wrong, it is still correct. Polly recited the words slowly. The pledge of the trial court, he said. Anji was stupefied. He had once heard the final line of this pledge. After coughing up those 2 mouthfuls of blood, his body unexpectedly became lighter, and his senses gradually dulled. Winter's fierce wind blew into his face, but it no longer made him shiver with cold. It was a kind of ethereal airiness, as though he was about to scatter in the wind. He once again propped himself up. Leaning against the railing, he looked down at the 2 badges. The hexagon-shaped badge was engraved with a design. The trial court's insignia was made up of 2 intersecting prismatic 4-pointed stars, resembling the icon on a map that indicated directions. The star that pointed north, south, east, and west were slightly bigger, and the arms that pointed south were elongated, forming a cross-like shape. The star that pointed north, east, southeast, southwest, and northwest was slightly smaller and hidden beneath the other star. Anji had examined this distinctively pointed shape many times. Its cold, silvery texture, sharp points, and straight lines all displayed breathtaking severity and impartiality. Polly's fingers stroked the 4-pointed star's surface. Perhaps he had traced its shape many a time, for the design on the badge bore deep traces of wear and tear. Its artwork was drawn by one of my colleagues. In the howling cold wind, Polly looked into the distant night sky. We had hoped that the 4-pointed star would point humankind in the correct direction, like a compass. "Weren't you a scientist of the fusion faction?" he asked in a low voice. "I was," Polly said. His tone of voice was soft, just like a sigh. "I was the leader of the fusion faction, as well as the founder of the trial court." The fusion faction was the trial court's predecessor. Anji suddenly remembered that in the trial court's long, long corridor, the portraits and birth and death dates of all the arbiters were lined up in a row. The picture frame at the end, however, had been removed, and the name and birth and death dates had been scraped off, leaving behind only a blurry P. That was the record of the first arbiter, but for some unknown reason it had been expunged by those who came after. The northern base was a place where various ethnic groups mingled. He didn't know which language the word Pali was transliterated from, but he could vaguely spell out the similar word Pali with letters. But his impression was that the ideologies, the fusion faction and the trial court were poles apart, completely incompatible. One hoped for humans and monsters to safely fuse, while the other mercilessly killed all fused xenogenics that tried to enter the base. The two sides were as far apart as the sky and earth. He was so doubtful that he didn't know what he ought to ask first. Polly said, "It was a coincidental thing." In the past, Anji had heard many people recount the history of the base. Those calm narrations were like limited rays of light, and he lifted the light to illuminate every corner of the dark room so as to piece together the full view of it. It seemed that the ability to maintain one's will post-infection only depended on chance. But we still believe that everything in nature had traces that could be followed. It's just that our capabilities were limited and that we had not yet glimpsed the patterns within. We were constantly doing research, going deeper and becoming more frenzied in that area. At that point, Polly had closed his eyes a little, and a faint pain appeared in his expression as he remembered. An experimental subject's body divided into two for reasons unexplained, but the halves had a unified consciousness. One of the two escaped the laboratory, while the other remained in the observation room. Because it looked like it had stayed there the entire time, we didn't discover the abnormality in time, and the half that escaped caused a tragic disaster. Anji knew about the disaster. A leech had polluted the water source of the entire outer city. The entirety of the outer city was exposed, and the base had to distinguish humans from xenogenics and promptly eliminate the latter. The fusion faction was to blame for this calamity. However, the ones who researched infection and mutation and were the most familiar with the differences between monsters, xenogenics, and humans were us as well, Polly said. In an instant, Anji came to the realization. At the very beginning, the trial court was not one of the military organizations. It used to be under the lighthouse's jurisdiction. All the experimental projects were discontinued. The samples were destroyed and the experimental subject was killed, but the space still gave the fusion faction the chance to atone for its sins. We set up the trial court overnight, drafted the trial rules, and tried the entire city. Over those 10 days, we killed half the base's population, Polly said slowly. The infection was controlled and the purity of human genes was preserved. And after that, the trial system continued in that manner. The annihilation of the Virginia base served as further proof of its correctness. I was part of the fusion faction for 10 years and the arbiter for 4 years. Polly spoke these words slowly. A shadow of smile appeared on his face, but that smile seemed more like a soundless wail of anguish, a grimace of pain. My original intent was to have everyone be able to achieve a peaceful life, but instead I slaughtered my compatriots every day. Over each day of those 14 years, my sins became increasingly deep. Anji said, "But you also protected the base." By no means was that the case, Polly said. I indiscriminately killed innocents every day. You drafted rules and followed the procedures so you wouldn't have indiscriminately killed innocents, Anji said, defending him. Polly's reply landed like a thunderclap. There were no trial rules, he said flatly. Anji's expression went blank for a second, for he had a hard time digesting the information in that sentence. With difficulty, he asked, There weren't? To be exact, there were no rules that would identify xenogenics with 100% accuracy. Polly sounded like he was sighing. We drafted the trial rules using the results of our lifelong research. From various aspects, appearance, movements, and thoughts, we could determine its species through the distinct reactions of creatures to external information. But there was no way to guarantee that it was absolutely correct. In truth, the rules could only identify 80% of xenogenics. For the remaining 20%, we could only rely on experience and intuition, along with expanding the scope of execution. It was better to kill mistakenly than let a xenogenic through. The first ironclad rule of the true trial rules was that under no circumstance were they to be shared with the outside world. By no means did we really follow those rules. For the sake of absolute safety, the trial court has always left room for mistaken kills. Polly's voice gradually darkened. When I guarded the gate to the outer city, every time I executed someone, there was an 80% chance that it was a real xenogenic. For the remaining 20%, I knew full well that they were most likely a real human, but I shot them anyway just to be sure. And among those xenogenics, there was a 1 in 10,000 chance of someone having human consciousness, 1 in 6,500 chance of someone recovering their human consciousness many years later. His voice grew hoarse. To this day, it's difficult for me to recall those 4 years. Anji imagined that sort of spectacle, and he imagined himself as a judge. He asked, So you left the base? I couldn't contend with my inner suffering. In the war between humans and xenogenics, I couldn't endure to the end. Polly looked up at the night sky. After a long silence, he said, At first, I suffered because I was killing my compatriots. But later, even the deaths of xenogenics was hard to bear. I had been interacting with them for so long, and I knew that every monster had its own life. My hands were drenched in blood. I was a guilty man. Later, I defected from the base with a handful of my colleagues and came to the Highland Research Institute, where we quietly continued the fusion faction's research and accepted xenogenics. Throughout my life, I've been atoning for my own sins. From then to now, 100 years have passed. 100 years. I was kind of wondering about that because I recalled that the arbiters had been around for a while. Anji looked at Polly, his expression slightly doubtful. As if understanding his doubt, Polly smiled. I've lived for too long. In the wilderness, the most unavoidable thing is infection. Polly rolled up his sleeve. On the skin of his right arm, there was a patch of messy black lines. I had been accidentally injured and infected by a member of the Research Institute. Before losing consciousness, I left them. However, perhaps because the person who infected me was lucid, or perhaps because chance favored me, I woke up. With those words, Polly smiled. I thought that only a few seconds had passed, but it had actually been several decades. It was like my consciousness had instantly traveled through time and space. Can you guess where I was? Anji shook his head. I was still at the Research Institute, Polly said. They had brought me back. Even though I was a mindless monster at the time, they didn't abandon me. I had once protected them, so they protected me as well. The sentiments between humans are just like that. What you give, you will get. In this age, trust between humans is something even more precious than life itself. But I had received it. Anji looked at the warm and peaceful expression in Polly's eyes. It wasn't until now that he understood why there would be such deep bonds between Polly and the rest of the members of the research institute. I don't regret leaving the base back then, but I can also never forgive my own evasion or my powerlessness, Polly finally said. Anji said, "Because you are of noble character." After doing some thinking, he added, "Because you're too kind." It was only because Polly loved every single person that he would suffer like that. If they were in an age of peace, he would definitely be someone who could not bear to kill even ants. Yet such a person had to raise a gun against his compatriots. Kindness is humankind's most notable weakness, Polly said. Kindness to oneself is the starting point of selfish desires, and kindness to others is the cause of wavering belief. I couldn't achieve complete indifference or true neutrality, so I was not a qualified arbiter. After he had finished speaking, there was silence for a long time. But while thinking on Polly's words, Anji frowned slightly, for he had thought of someone. "But a judge once said something to me," Anji murmured. "The source of the arbiter's belief is not indifference but kindness. Kindness not to individuals but to the fate of all humankind. If one were to steadfastly believe that humankind's interests take precedence over all else, they would not waver." As Polly looked at him, he asked softly, "How can one steadfastly believe?" "And supposing one does not harbor kindness towards every single person," he asked, each word clearly pronounced, "how can they steadfastly give their whole life for the interests of all humankind?" And she was stunned. His fingers, which were hanging at his side, began trembling. He finally knew why he would think of Lu Feng, who was Polly's polar opposite, every time he faced Polly. Polly closed his eyes, his voice hoarse, as he said, "This is the cause of all the arbiter's suffering. Abandon your humanity, indiscriminately kill innocents without restraint, and ultimately be executed by the base. Or maintain your clarity of mind and eventually fall into madness as a result of unbearable suffering. These are the only two fates for an arbiter," Polly said slowly. "The moment the rules were drafted, they were all doomed to meet terrible ends." Anji could not describe what he was feeling in that moment. Having difficulty breathing, he looked at the four-pointed star badge in his hand. "If there was an arbiter," he said, "who has always had clarity of mind and always guarded the city gates, and there had never been mistakes in his judgment." He suddenly came to a realization, and his voice trembled as he said, "There's nobody who doesn't hate him because other judges only kill a few dozen of people each year, while he kills up to 1,000. In truth, it's not because he particularly likes shooting. It's because there can be the greatest reduction in mistaken kills only when he shoots." Oh shit. Oh, that's... He understood. He finally understood. With a shiver, he asked Polly, what kind of a person would he be? Polly's answer was simpler than he had imagined. "He would be a very lonely person," he said. Something came plummeting down, striking Anji's heart with the force of a trembling boulder. For a long while he could not speak, not until Polly asked, "What are you thinking about?" I'm Anji's vision blurred. I'm thinking about..." He was thinking about Lu Feng. He had once thought that Lu Feng was cold-hearted, and he had once admitted that Lu Feng's beliefs were steadfast. He knew that for the illusionary fate of humankind, Colonel Lu could give his entire life. He also knew that Colonel Lu would suffer and be lonely, but it was only today that he knew exactly what sort of an intentionally rooted, unimaginable colossus the man faced. He once said that he understood Lu Feng, but it was only at this moment, when he and Lu Feng were many miles apart and would never meet again, that he completely understood Lu Feng. I know who the arbiter you speak of is. Tang Lan mentioned him to me many times. If possible, I really would like to meet him, Polly said. While Anji clutched the badge, his tears finally began falling. He's been the arbiter for 7 years and killed many people. Everyone hates him. But he was very good to me, he smiled, but the rims of his eyes felt hot. The tip of his nose was bright red. In fact, he's very good to everyone. You said that you're a monster through and through, Polly said. But as an arbiter, I haven't found any difference between you and humans. What about that arbiter? He couldn't be certain. Anji's fingers trembled slightly, and he looked at the unbroken chain of mountains in the distance. The first time we met, he spared me. Sir, he said, if the arbiter spares a xenogenic for the first time, will he do it a second time? Polly only gave him a warm look. He also spared me a second time. He spared me many times, Anji said. Later, he knew that I was a xenogenic. But he wanted to say something, but nothing came out. His heart had been caught in a death grip. He wanted to free himself of this inescapable imprisonment, but he could not. I'm sorry. He recognized that he was utterly incapable of forming a complete sentence. Brokenly, he said, as soon as I think of him, I want to cry. Polly took Anji into his arms. Don't cry, child. Live on, he said. You will see him again. I won't see him again. Anji grasped Polly's arm like he was gripping his final lifeline amidst the tempestuous storm of emotion. Sorry about that. He couldn't stop his tears from flowing, and in the end he could only shakily close them and rest his forehead against Polly's shoulder. I wish I hadn't met him at all. Why? Anji couldn't say anything. With me you can say anything, child, Polly murmured. There's no need to deceive me, nor is there any need to deceive yourself. Choking, Anji cried even harder. He didn't understand human relationships, but facing Polly, he seemed to have understood them. It was like he was facing a gentle father, a loving priest, or perhaps a lenient God. Kneeling in the temple of the Lord, he could confess everything, just like any other ordinary person. But in fact, it wasn't to any other person or deity, but to himself. He opened his mouth, his entire body trembling because of the severe pain, and his mind completely blank. He finally crossed the emotional barrier and blurted out, I want to see him. I want to see him. He repeated the words almost despairingly. I want to see him, sir. I want to see him. I don't regret leaving him, but I regret it so much. I know. Polly gently patted Anji's back, comforting him. You don't know, she said, his words contradicting each other. His emotions were torn to shreds, and grief inundated his soul like an ocean. If the omnipresent pain of yearning killed him, he would not have felt the least bit surprised. It might have been a mercy. I've lived many decades more than you, child, Polly said. You're still young, and there are still too many things you do not know. Anji blankly lifted his head. He could not make any retort, nor did he have any intention to argue. There really was something accumulating in his chest. unable to be grasped or seen clearly. He couldn't describe it. He looked past Polly's shoulder at the boundless night sky and mumbled, "What do I not know?" But thump. In the brief silence, Anji heard his own heartbeat. He suddenly had the feeling that what Polly had said was about to say might change his entire life. He heard Polly's breaths. "You don't know," in the stillness, Polly said, "that you love him." Anji opened his eyes wide. In the sky, the aurora fluctuated, its deep green light like a rolling tide. It traveled from south to north, dissipating before being reborn. He began to tremble violently. A fierce intuition struck his soul like a shooting star hitting the earth, its glow brightly illuminating everything in the world. He actually didn't know exactly what sort of meaning those 3 words held, but he knew that they were correct. He was completely dumbstruck, forgetting even his sorrow as he stared dazedly at the faraway aurora. Polly let go of him and gently dried the tears on his face with a handkerchief. "But why would I be like this?" he mumbled. Without waiting for a reply, he was swept up in another more pressing question. Then will he love me too?" He looked at Polly almost pleadingly. "Will he love me too? I'm just a xenogenic." "Has he said anything to you before?" And he shook his head. "The relationship was frighteningly short," he said. "But he kissed me. But he was by no means clear on the meaning of the kiss. That day the power of words was too feeble, so they could only do that." "You're still alive," Polly said. "Did he let you leave?" "I left him. He has always been a qualified arbiter. I know he wouldn't spare me," Anji said slowly. "At that time, I only wanted to leave him and find a place to die. But it was only because his gun fell into my backpack that I was able to return to the abyss." "His gun fell into your backpack?" Polly repeated. Anji made a soft sound of affirmation, and an unsteady smile appeared in his eyes. He liked to randomly leave his things with me. Polly Jones slowly stroked Anji's hair. "You must know, silly child," Polly said. "The arbiter's gun never leaves his side. That is an ironclad rule that was established 100 years ago." Anji silently met his eyes. In the end, he bit down on his lips. "I don't know," he said. "I really don't know." "No matter what reason it stemmed from," Polly told him, "he definitely loves you too. That's what that means." "Would an arbiter like a xenogenic?" "I don't know," Polly said, "but I've also lived with many xenogenics for 100 years. If you believe I still have the qualifications to be called an arbiter." While looking into those seemingly all-knowing gray-blue eyes, Anji thought that Polly definitely knew the reason why Lu Feng would like him, but he didn't dare to ask. Polly must have had his reasons for not saying it. Image after image appeared before his eyes. At the city gates, a woman who had lost her husband hoarsely cursed him to die a miserable death. The supply depot's public square, a bullet traveled through the back of Duce's head, but she pitched forward towards him. Countless silhouettes appeared before his eyes. Those hoarse shouts, the trembling dread, the bone-deep admiration. Countless shadows rose up and surged together, reaching up with their hands. With love, hate, and tacitly understood grudges and fear piled up, they pushed him to the mountaintop, where the cold wind howled, making him look down at those hordes of living things. No one approached him, no one understood him, and his admirers would rather order a false mannequin using all their wealth than speak a single sentence to him of their own accord. As for the arbiter's compassion and favor, It was something nobody dared to even dream of. What sort of bone-chilling fear and unimaginable honor was that? He was a xenogenic, something dimensionally opposed to humankind. Diametrically, not dimensionally, diametrically opposed to humankind. But he faintly hoped to receive it. And unexpectedly, he had received it. At least, the moment Lu Feng put his gun into Anji's backpack. Within the eons, there was only once such a second. In that second, the Arbiter left his pistol to a xenogenic, forsaking his lifelong beliefs to love him. Then, just like a fairy tale in the children's textbooks, the midnight bell rang. The one returned to the abyss, while the other returned to the base. Like a gradually stopping sandstorm, as the bell rang, the dust settled. Anji's heartbeat returned to its normal frequency bit by bit. He had received unimaginable gifts, but he was utterly calm. He thought that it was enough. All of it was enough. If there comes a day when humankind is safe and you see him, he said to Polly, please don't tell him that I came here. Polly said, no one can lie to the Arbiter. Then say that I have come and gone, Anji said. I've gone far away, and I may be anywhere in the world. Polly looked at him with a gentle yet sorrowful gaze. I truly hope God can favor you too, he said. But Anji slowly shook his head. But I can't love him and he can't love me, Anji murmured. Unless the day comes when humankind falls. But I hope that day will never come. In that moment, an assured tranquility enveloped him. Countless translucent white chips of ice were born in the gaps between the aurora and the clouds. They drifted down, and the silent mountain scenery and night came alive as a result of all the flying bits of ice. It was snowing. Anji held out his hand, and a hexagonal snowflake landed on his finger. The beautiful shape gradually lost its form amidst his skin's warmth, and drew in upon itself to form a crystalline droplet of water. I've known you all for only 3 months, he said, but this is my whole lifetime. The wind grew louder, and thousands of snowflakes blew into the corridor like willow catkins carried aloft by the spring wind. Anji looked up. He thought that everything from the forgotten past was unfolding before his eyes and dispersing into twinkling fragments. The tempestuous storm subsided, the waves and undercurrents simultaneously ceasing to flow. He couldn't describe it as sad, nor was it anywhere close to being happy. He only felt that the snow was beautiful. The joys and sorrows throughout his life, the meetings and partings, were just like the births and deaths of all the tangible things in the world. They were all ephemeral snowflakes. Are you cold? Not anymore. He memorized the shape of that snowflake, and in that second he obtained eternity. The aurora lit up the abyss. From the laboratory suddenly came the sound of glass shattering. That is the end of chapter 44, and we have one more chapter after a quick tea break. Wouldn't that suck if that was where we ended tonight with the glass shattering? At least you get to have a little bit of well, we might have another cliffhanger. Who knows? Let me blow my nose. All right. Chapter 45. Is this what God wanted to show us? That's quite a statement. The aurora suddenly flashed. Crash! The sound of glass flying everywhere tore open the silent night. Anji turned to look at the laboratory. Polly also looked at the window in that direction. Rum? Miss clung to the window glass, blurring everything inside, so that all that was visible was a faint human silhouette. Sir! Rum's voice was rarely so excited. He smacked the window with a hand, making banging noises. After opening the window lock, his voice became clear as well, but it carried a tremor. The screen! The screen! Polly shot a sudden look into the room. Just as before, the messy lines were dancing on the big screen. But Rum said, Just now! Anji coughed a few times, then said, I'm all right. After confirming that he was still clear-headed, Polly strode towards the laboratory. Anji surreptitiously swallowed a mouthful of blood and followed. His body was in a strange state, weakened and in pain to the breaking point, but it was precisely because he'd reached those limits that it seemed like he was now completely relaxed. In the laboratory, Rum had broken a glass bottle containing antibiotic granules. Glittering shards of glass lay all over the ground, but nobody thought to sweep it up. Polly came over to the big screen, and as the lines fluctuated like a ball of wriggling worms, he asked, What is it? Rum's lips opened and closed. It was clear. Just now, it was clear. It was difficult for Anji to describe Polly's expression in that moment, for it was like all sorts of excessively fierce emotions had mixed together, but changed into blankness instead. Polly's hands trembled. He placed his right hand on the instrument's operating level. Are you certain? The expression in Rum's eyes seemed hesitant, or perhaps he was striving to remember. Polly stared hard at him, and 3 seconds later he said, I'm certain. Polly Jones looked at the screen, Anji standing behind him. The research facilities humans had used to study the artificial magnetic poles during the period when technology was at its peak. Even if much of its equipment had been lost due to the many years of neglect, still a functioning physics laboratory. Within the breathless silence, Polly pulled the operating lever and adjusted the fluctuating lines backwards. He asked, Around what time frame? Rum said, Just now. He went silent for a while, weighing his words, and said, It was just the blink of an eye. Polly took a deep breath, adjusting the instrument's recording to 3 minutes ago, and began playing it back, frame by frame, on the small screen. Those dancing and wiggling black lines varied in appearance. Some formed curves, while others were star-like scattered black dots. They tangled together in that manner, just like destiny. In every frame, their shapes changed, but these changes were irregular. After staying in the laboratory for almost half a month, Anji knew that what the Simpson cage captured was the interaction frequency between elementary particles. Polly always used frequency to describe it. The complexity and disorderliness of this frequency were beyond the scope of what humankind's existing scientific knowledge could handle. Polly strove to find a way to receive and process them so that they'd clear up, just like a person hearing a piece of music, trying to write a score for it, or perhaps continuously adjusting the radio frequencies in anticipation of receiving a clear signal. But for a long time, there had not been the slightest progress in this work. Facing those disorderly lines, Polly once said that he was like a mortal wishing to hear God's decrees. yet also like an ant trying to decipher human language. As Anji looked at the still pulsing big screen, he occasionally turned his worried gaze towards Polly. He discovered that Rum was doing likewise. In this drawn-out experiment, there had always been too many failures. It wasn't possible to replicate the moment of clarity Rum spoke of. He would rather that Polly never received the information in the first place. One frame, followed by another frame. The fire in the fireplace burned with vigor, making the crackle pop sound of firewood splitting apart from time to time. In the silent laboratory, the sound was particularly dramatic. A ghostly image suddenly leapt out onto the screen. Even Anji could not help but hold his breath. On the dark gray background, all the lines suddenly disappeared. Then what appeared were countless faint white dots that were packed together, translucent and gradually fading into the background. It was difficult to describe what sort of shape it was with human language. There seemed to be no pattern to them at all, gathering in certain parts and dispersing to others. There were no white dots scattered in the center of the diagram, but a circle like a volcanic crater had formed around it, and the irregular dark gray circle was reminiscent of a sinister and menacing eye. It was like humans in the civilized age had taken a picture of an incomparably grand nebula, then converted it into a lifeless grayscale. It's this one, Rum said. Did the machine break? No. Polly slowly shook his head. Perhaps because his mood was excessively tense, his pupils were slightly dilated. Such a pattern wouldn't appear for no reason. Something must have happened. When Tonglan pushed open the laboratory door, there were faint shadows under his eyes. He was clearly somewhat listless. Sir, he said, do you need something from me? Polly said, were you asleep? I'm very sorry to have woken you. Tonglan shook his head. I was already awake when Rum shouted for me. Polly asked, were you not sleeping well? I was just thinking of coming to find you, Tonglan said. The wave suddenly amplified. For a second, I felt a sharp spike, and then I woke up. What about now? Polly asked. It's okay now. Polly didn't speak for a long time, not until Tonglan asked, what's wrong, sir? There's nothing wrong with our methods. Right when you felt the wave's amplification, an abnormality occurred in the images captured by the Simpson cage as well. Polly's expression was grave. Tonglan frowned. Isn't that good news? No, Polly said. I thought of a problem. In the laboratory, nobody made a sound, save for Polly. His gaze turned from the small screen that displayed the captured image to the big screen where the complex lines surged. We wanted to capture the wave's frequency and analyze the cause of the distortion. But what if what it's currently showing is the contest between the Earth's artificial magnetic field and the unknown wave coming from the universe? I understand what you mean. Tonglan jerked his head up. The magnetic field can resist the wave, but what the Simpson cage received at the same time was both of their frequencies. They're interfering with each other. Yes, Polly said. I've always been thinking, if the magnetic field could completely resist the wave, why would genetic infection still occur here on Earth? If they've always been in a deadlock, it would make sense. The wave has always affected the Earth, but the magnetic field is also putting up resistance, so we hadn't yet reached the point where matter would be utterly distorted. The frequencies of the two have always been tangled together. If that's the case, Tonglan furrowed his brows. Sir, if you wish to analyze the wave with the Simpson cage, you have to wait for the wave to triumph over the magnetic field or for the artificial magnetic poles to no longer work. That's right, Polly said slowly. But as soon as the wave gains the upper hand, matter will distort and the Simpson cage equipment will be affected as well. No, Polly said. There is a way. Everyone looked at Polly, not saying a word. In the quiet laboratory, Polly continued. The Highland Research Institute has multiple portable independent magnetic poles that can generate small magnetic fields with limited ranges, which is the fruit of past research. It was only because of those that we were able to survive the calamitous failure of the artificial magnetic poles a month prior. Supposing the artificial magnetic pole covering the Earth disappears, we'll adjust the portions of the independent magnetic poles to protect the Simpson cage's core equipment, simultaneously expose the receiving area to the maximum extent. Polly narrowed his gray-blue eyes slightly as he looked at the raging sea of flames downstairs. Tanglon said, Then we can analyze the pure wave frequency. That's right, that's right. Polly took a deep breath. The light of hope had just lit in his eyes, but then was promptly extinguished. However, he stopped himself before he finished speaking. The room suddenly quieted. Nobody made a sound. At last, Tanglon asked, Can the wave only be seen after distortion triumphs over the artificial magnetic field? He looked at the night sky outside, his voice bitter. Polly sat down slowly in front of the computer. Facing the communication channel linked to the base, he did not move for a long while. Only at our dying moment can we glimpse the truth, he muttered. Is this what God wanted to show us? Manji stood in a corner as he quietly watched everything happen. Polly's conjecture was well-founded. Supposing that the strange wave was all that remained in this world, the instrument may show it in its entirety. In fact, that was feasible. Polly was now facing the communication channel, and perhaps he was mulling over his words. So long as either the northern base or the underground city base agreed to shut down their artificial magnetic pole, the truth would be revealed to them. But what about afterward? What would happen to the two bases after the loss of the magnetic field? The calamity from 1 month prior directly reduced the northern base's surviving population to 8,000. He couldn't imagine the kind of struggle Polly was now facing. This kind scientist had left the base precisely because he couldn't bear to watch the minority sacrificing themselves for the majority. But the world seemed to be just like this. Made those who sought to survive die, made those who were kind commit massacres, and made those who sought the truth fall into despair instead. Facing the screen, Polly slowly closed his eyes. Tanglon said, Allow me. No, Polly said. We cannot make such an unreasonable request. The bases have established emergency systems within a short span of time. So long as they have made preparations, they will be able to survive, Tanglon said. And if the apparatus gets damaged because of distortion in the brief span that the artificial magnetic pole is shut down for, what then? In the winter, once the protection of the magnetic field is lost, the environment will be even worse than in the summer, Polly said. I can use the independent magnetic poles to simulate a reverse force field and cancel out the artificial magnetic field within the scope of the Simpsons cage to create a non-magnetized space. I don't understand your expert knowledge, Tanglon said. But the artificial magnetic field itself is a very complex frequency, so it must be very difficult. Perhaps it will be much simpler compared to the work from before, Tanglon said. But the fastest way is to have the bases briefly shut down the magnetic poles. You can't do this. Tanglon looked at Polly. I know your research is correct. You've wished to investigate this calamity for decades already. So long as you can see the wave, you'll definitely be able to find a way to deal with it. You've always been excessively kind. Furthermore, we're only making a request. They may not agree to it. The Northern Base only believes in human interests, and we are xenogenics. Every year, they go so far as to dispatch troops to try to eliminate us. He put his hand on the keyboard and murmured, "This is my individual action. All the consequences have nothing to do with you, sir." Polly only watched him as though he were watching a willful child. Pale fingertips rested on the keyboard. 1 second, 2 seconds. Hovering fingertips silently rested in the air above the keyboard. 3 seconds, 4 seconds. He suddenly released a trembling breath. "I'm sorry." His trembling fingers dropped, leaving a string of nonsense in the input field. As though he were facing something frightful, he took 2 steps back, and the rims of his eyes were red as he said, "I can't do it." As though he had anticipated such a result long in advance, Polly shook his head gently. "Silly child." Tanglan's eyes reddened. Anji watched all of the proceedings from near the fireplace. The choices humans faced were often difficult, and sometimes their inner suffering would exceed their physical pain. What Polly said earlier was correct. Kindness was humankind's most notable weakness. Under the ruthless world's weight, Tanglan would suffer, and Polly would suffer 100-fold. Thus, he looked at Polly for a long time, waiting for him to make a choice amidst his inner suffering. Destiny was so fickle that even 100 years after he was relieved of his position as arbiter, he still had to face such a difficult choice. It was right during this difficult deadlock that the aurora flashed one more time. Rum looked reflexively at the big screen, and Anji followed suit. The ghostly image appeared on the screen again, but for longer this time, with a full 3 seconds passing before it disappeared. The strange scatterplot was branded onto Anji's retinas. At the same time, Tanglan pressed a hand against his temple. "I heard it again," he said. What did it mean? Even Anji knew that this meant the unknown wave coming from the universe had suddenly strengthened. As it turned out, it was not gradually advancing, as the humans had predicted. It was completely capable of advancing by leaps and bounds. After 5 seconds of silence, the aurora visibly flashed again, like the sudden contraction of some massive thing's heart, and the entire world fell into complete darkness. On the screen, densely concentrated specks of light were everywhere. "It's almost here," Tanglan said, his voice hoarse. He closed his eyes and lifted his hand, burying his face in its palm. "It's almost here, I heard it. It'll exceed the magnetic field strength very soon. Sir, you don't have to feel torn any longer. The distortion has arrived, and it can't be stopped." What? He hung his head. "What did we do everything for?" With those words he started to laugh, and the laughter was despairing. There was probably blood in his throat, Anji thought. Just now they were still being tormented by the question of whether they were going to ask the base to shut down the magnetic pulse. Still resenting this cruel world and cruel destiny that insisted on opposing them, and still drifting within their inner suffering, they thought that they still had the room to choose. But in the very next moment they became aware of how ridiculous their struggles and resentments were. It had been an utterly purposeless struggle. Of course, all of mankind's purposes were purposeless. The world cared about nothing. It was neither cruel nor callous, only uncaring, indifferent. It didn't care about their happiness, and of course it didn't care about their suffering. It seemed to only be undergoing a natural change, only progressing little by little. Of course it had no inclination to allow humankind to know the true reason. There was no need. The only ones who truly persisted in figuring out the root cause were humans themselves. Humankind would be exterminated, all living creatures would die, and the earth would collapse. but it didn't care. Anji stared blankly at the sky outside. After intermittent flashes, the aurora up above began to quiver madly. The green light shattered with terrifying speed into dazzling meteors that flew in every direction, and the magnificent meteor shower burned out, its remnants streaking through the pitch-black sky. Beep! In the laboratory, the machine emitted a drawn-out noise. Anji jerked his head up and spotted a flurry of snowflakes on the big screen. Polly gripped the chair's armrest with his right hand, and his age was apparent in his hoarse voice as he said, "Start up the independent magnetic poles." His voice was accompanied by a bone-chilling chorus of howls, none of which could be easily described with onomatopoeias from any human language. Vibrating together, they pierced eardrums. Outside the window, down the mountain, in the abyss, the monsters let out howls that transcended common sense. Flap. The tremendous sound of flapping wings came from the jungle, as though thousands of birds had taken flight. They'd been lurking in the abyss for a long time, testing each other and refusing to budge. But now that the magnetic field was finally on the verge of collapse, these horrific monsters had suddenly begun to stir. Why? He didn't know. The first shadow flew through the sky above the Highland Research Institute. Polly went to the Simpsons cage console. "Sir," Tonglan murmured, "do we still have any time left?" Polly said, "We don't." "Then do you still want to continue?" A brief silence. "Humankind's aspirations are like the moon in the water," he dazedly said all of a sudden. "It looks like it's within reach, but in fact, it breaks as soon as we touch the water's surface. But when we thought that the broken moon also had value and reach out to but when we thought that the broken moon also had value, reached out to scoop it up, we discovered that there was only water in our hands. What's even more absurd is that in less than half a minute, even the water had flowed away through our fingers." He looked at the numerous specks of light as though he were looking at a remote dream. "But supposing I was given a chance, allowing me to still stand by the water, would I still be willing to go scoop it up?" Anji asked a little hesitantly. "Would you still be willing?" Polly Jones' eyes were reddened, his gaze shaky, and his voice choked with sobs. In the end, he closed his eyes. "I would." Tonglan took out a black walkie-talkie from his pocket. He looked at everything before him, then dropped his dull gaze and said flatly, "Prepare to defend." And that is the end of chapter 45, where we will be ending it tonight. What a place to end it! Wow! So it sounds like the aurora is failing, and that's definitely going to cause some shit. We are almost done. In fact, if we even wanted to, we've got a solid, usual time chapter session for next week. That's 48. So we can do this two ways. Thank you for the hearts. So next week we have 2 chapters before we arrive at the epilogue. So technically it's almost the end. And then we have the epilogue, which I think is kind of like the extras chapters like they do in MXTX books. Hang on. Let me see. This is 240. Come on. I'm trying to flip the page back Oh my gosh, I'm struggling. There we go. Okay, so this is basically 250. Where does it end? That's another 50 pages. Okay, so that's going to be a whole session. Well, how much was today? I'm trying to figure out if we're going to keep going. No, that's a whole session. Okay, but I will actually have time if you guys want. We'll do this session next week, at least 46 through 48. And then we actually arrive at the epilogue right here. Sorry, that was probably really sharp on your ears. So we arrive at the epilogue, and we can either do, so that would be Thursday. It's broken down currently into about 40 and 50 pages, or if we wanted to do a gigantic reading on Thursday of the entire epilogue. I'll post a poll about that, and we'll see. So next Tuesday should be business as usual, and then Thursday might be super long. So I'll ask. I'll post and ask. But yeah, that was pretty cool tonight. We got some different perspectives. We had the surprise arbiter in Polly. But yeah, lots of good stuff. We also had an eldritch horror hiding in a lake, which I thought was terrifying. But yeah, all right. I know it's a little earlier than usual, which is why I kind of was looking at those other two chapters. Let me look at my schedule real quick. Let me see. Because part of me kind of wants to tackle those two chapters tonight. Then we just break the epilogue up into two. And then we'll start next month. Do you guys want to continue tonight? I'm going to drink some tea while I wait. Because it's still early. No. We'll just call it. All right. We'll call it, and then we'll have a good stream next time. But thank you all so much for coming. It's Thursday, so the next time I will see you is Tuesday at 8 CST. And I can't wait for you to be there. We'll figure it out that day. But yes. Good night. All right. All good. We're just going to call it for tonight. We'll start fresh on Tuesday. Good night. Bye.